Vietnam is rapidly absorbing a massive share of the global manufacturing supply chain, securing its position as a high-growth production node in Southeast Asia. This acceleration is driven by the China Plus One strategy, as manufacturers diversify their production lines and send a surge of foreign direct investment from the US, Japan, and Europe into Vietnamese industrial zones. That capital influx is reinforced by a dense network of free trade agreements. Pacts like the CPTPP and EVFTA provide tariff advantages necessary to push export volumes to record highs. The macroeconomic result is visible in the data. According to the World Bank's Logistics Performance Index, Vietnam now consistently ranks in the global top 50, a leading position among emerging markets. But underneath these top-line metrics, the system is struggling. While the country is highly integrated into global trade, the internal logistics engine remains inefficient, bleeding domestic capital at every step. Vietnam is successfully capturing global market share, but its current internal supply chain architecture is too fractured to sustain long-term profitability. Comparing logistics costs as a percentage of GDP, the global average is 10 to 12%, and developed nations at 8 to 9%. Vietnam sits between 16 and 18%. This gap acts as a direct tax, causing lost profit margins and inflated consumer prices. Resolving the physical and operational bottlenecks driving this cost transforms a systemic drain into a massive optimization opportunity. To reclaim that GDP spread, we have to systematically deconstruct where this network architecture is failing. The first structural driver of these high costs is an extreme imbalance in how freight moves across the country. Between 60 to 70% of all domestic freight volume is forced onto the physical road network. Moving industrial freight at scale by truck is the most expensive and carbon-intensive method available. Vietnam has viable, cheaper alternatives in its coastline and inland waterways, yet these modes remain severely underutilized. The core failure is physical connectivity. These waterways lack the infrastructure required to interface with deep-water export hubs like Cai Mep Ti Vai. Low-cost transport modes lose their economic value if the cargo cannot physically reach global export nodes without being loaded back onto a truck. While physical improvements to roads and waterways are necessary, the operational corporate layer managing the movement of freight introduces its own structural inefficiencies. The domestic market is highly fragmented. 80 to 90% of Vietnamese logistics firms are small to medium enterprises. These firms typically act as low-tier subcontractors, providing isolated services like basic trucking or small-scale warehousing, rather than managing a complete supply chain. Multinational clients require integrated end-to-end solutions, specifically third-party or fourth-party logistics providers, known as 3PL and 4PL. An operational layer composed of thousands of disconnected microbusinesses cannot efficiently service a modernized, globalized infrastructure network. This fragmented network is now being hit by three simultaneous demand waves. First, the FDI manufacturing wave demands high-standard, high-volume industrial transportation capabilities that local SMEs struggle to finance. Second, the domestic e-commerce boom requires a completely different architecture, one built on automated fulfillment centers and hyper-fast last-mile delivery. Third, Western export markets are enforcing strict new environmental mandates, specifically carbon tracking and ESG standards. Multinational corporations will systematically drop domestic logistics partners that cannot provide the digital tracking and green compliance required by these regulations. Domestic firms failing to digitize and green their operations will be excised from the global supply chain. Compressing the 18% GDP drain by 2030 requires four strategic shifts in the industry's architecture. Shift 1 is industry consolidation. Domestic SMEs must pursue mergers and acquisitions to aggregate their capabilities and scale into full-service 3PL and 4PL providers. Shift 2 requires moving away from scattered, isolated warehousing towards centralized logistics hubs located near urban centers like Haiphong, Da Nang, and Bà Rịa Vũng Tàu. Shift 3 is the implementation of core digital software, specifically warehouse management systems and transport management systems. Firms must master this core digital tracking before investing capital in expensive physical automation like robotics. Corporate scale and fundamental data digitization must precede any investments in physical warehouse automation. The fourth shift targets high-margin sectors, the expansion of cold chain logistics to protect agricultural and seafood exports. While cold chains offer higher profit margins, they require massive, capital-intensive investments in specialized facilities. Parallel to this is the transition to green logistics. This includes transitioning to electric vehicle fleets and securing international building certifications, like Lotus or LEED, to pass Western trade audits. Green logistics has become a rigid mathematical prerequisite for maintaining access to international capital and global trade networks. None of these physical or digital upgrades can operate without a fundamental upgrade to human capital. The ultimate bottleneck threatening this vision is a severe shortage of high-level supply chain management talent. The industry lacks personnel with expertise in advanced data analytics, cross-border legal compliance, and systems-level operational thinking. Solving this requires deep integration between academic institutions and enterprise operations through internships and co-op programs to bridge the gap between theory and practice. Unless Vietnam cultivates the strategic minds required to run these smart green networks, the physical upgrades will stall and the 18% paradox will remain unbroken.